Mr. Speaker, I move that this House stand adjourned, sine die.
On the motion, this House stands adjourned, sine die.
What you just heard and saw was the annual expression of joy and relief from Georgia lawmakers as they closed the door on the 2025 Georgia General Assembly session. That happened just this past week. But one of the top headlines we are following on this edition of Political Update for Wednesday, April 9th, 2025 is the topic of tariffs. I'm Tim Darnell. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Political Update from Atlanta News First on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com. One of the hottest political topics that have been really breaking over the past 48 to 72 hours is the imposition of tariffs by the United States on virtually all imported products coming into the country. President Donald Trump has imposed a 104% tariff increase on all Chinese goods imported into the United States. Overnight, the nation of China also raised its tariffs on all U.S. imported products to 84%. Recently, just within a few hours ago of this broadcast, the European Union also responded with its own increase on tariffs on American imported goods into the European Union. Now, helping all of us break down this issue of tariffs and what it means for the American consumer is Jared Hill from CBS News.
We're making deals and people are paying tariffs.
President Trump championed his new dose of so-called tariff medicine as he says countries are flocking to negotiate with the new reciprocal tariffs hitting overnight.
They're giving us everything.
The president says leaders from Japan and South Korea are headed to the U.S. to negotiate. Vietnam and Zimbabwe have said they would scrap tariffs on U.S. products. The EU has said it'll eliminate tariffs on industrial goods and cars if the U.S. does the same. And no progress with a defiant China. Instead, a 104% tariff after Beijing refused to drop its 34% tariff on U.S. goods, likely meaning more expensive electronics and clothing. Imported produce largely spared, most coming from Canada and Mexico, which have been exempted. But food industry experts warn some prices may rise quickly for some perishable staples like bananas.
Fresh products, because you can't build up inventories and there's a limited lifespan, you will feel that quickly, maybe as soon as a week or 10 days.
As financial markets continue their roller coaster. Jared Hill, CBS News, New York.
That was Jared Hill from CBS News talking about the issue of tariffs that has erupted across the global stage as a result of President Donald Trump's quote-unquote Liberation Day announcement, where he announced a series of tariffs on virtually every imported goods into the United States. On Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com is a report from our own Doug Reardon on how the tariffs could impact pharmaceutical products that are purchased here in Georgia. Here is our own Doug Reardon's report.
Pharmaceuticals have traditionally been exempt from tariffs, but if they do go into effect, as President Donald Trump has said they would, the cost of your medication could go up. Chapman Drugs has been providing vital medication to customers for over 100 years in downtown Hapeville. Owner and third-generation pharmacist Derek Chapman says the industry is already struggling. 3,000 pharmacies across the U.S. closed in 2024, and even big box names are hurting too. Walgreens plans to shutter 1,200 stores this year.
I'm not really freaking out, but it's just another thing to have to deal with.
The threat of tariffs on the pharmaceutical industry, which was initially exempt from the latest round, may be coming, and around 90% of America's drugs are manufactured overseas.
Be some pain before it's figured out. I imagine that prices will go up, which will affect the small business in the short run, and will affect the consumer in the long run.
Medication for diabetes, cholesterol, heart disease, cancer, even your common headache could get more expensive. According to a study from ING Bank, a reciprocal tariff could push more common heart medication from 82 cents to 94 cents per pill, an extra $42 a year. More complex treatments like generic cancer drugs might see a jump of $8,000 to $10,000 for a 6-month prescription. But Chapman says tariffs may help in one area.
These tariffs might be an important way for us to bring manufacturing back to the United States.
But he doesn't expect insurance or the drug makers to eat any of the costs until that happens, in addition to high costs. In the meantime,
if tariffs are involved and there's a slowdown in raw ingredients and in manufacturing, that'll lead to shortages, so there will be times where some medications may not be available.
And on that note, pharmacists worry that any disruptions could impact drugs already experiencing nationwide shortages, things like ADHD medications, Vyvanse, and Adderall. From downtown Hapeville, Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
That was political reporter Doug Reardon on the impact of tariffs on pharmaceutical goods and products purchased here in Georgia. And the issue of tariffs is something we are covering extensively on Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com. As you saw and heard at the top of this stream, Georgia General Assembly adjourned this past Friday to a eruption of joy and relief from lawmakers, as it always occurs on Sine Die every year when the Georgia General Assembly adjourns. Again, one of the hardest working reporters in Georgia, Doug Reardon, has this report on Sine Die.
Happy Sine Die, everybody. Thank you so much.
As the night grew later, Governor Brian Kemp addressed the State House and Senate, urging them to keep up their work passing meaningful legislation. They only have tonight to do it. Kemp praised their work throughout the months-long session.
The partnership and thoughtful coordination between the House, the Senate, and my office has benefited the people of our state and put Georgia on a path to continued prosperity and opportunity.
This session, lawmakers passed Kemp's priority, an overhaul of Georgia's civil litigation system, another $1 billion tax rebate, a handful of school safety bills, and the 2026 budget, a roughly $38 billion package. But lots of high-profile bills didn't make it to a final vote. A proposal that would give tax breaks for gun safety classes and a bill that would strip state funding from public schools that have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs fell flat. So did a bill that would overhaul Georgia's elections, requiring election night hand counts of ballots and giving more authority to partisan poll workers.
That was Doug Reardon on the various last-minute laws and bills and measures that was adopted by the Georgia General Assembly this past week as it adjourned. One of the top stories on atlantanewsfirst.com over the past really 72 hours has been a story that we pulled from one of our wire services that we also optimized with a lot of Atlanta News First political content. That top story being that on the last day of the Georgia General Assembly, lawmakers passed a bill that would allow President Donald Trump and more than a dozen of his co-defendants in his historic indictment from Fulton County DA Bonnie Willis on allegations of election interference, that would allow the president and his co-defendants to recoup or recover all of their attorney costs that they have spent in their legal defense should Fulton County DA Bonnie Willis be disqualified and recused from her now stalled indictment that is still waiting a final decision on the Georgia Court of Appeals and possibly the Supreme Court of Georgia. Now, if this measure is passed, or signed, I should say, by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, it would allow other criminal defendants to recoup their attorney fees and related costs if a prosecutor is disqualified from their case and their case is dismissed. Georgia is one of 12 states without a law, perhaps only until now, that compensates people who are wrongfully convicted if they prove they are innocent or of the crime or to any lesser offense. So this is a bill that is awaiting Governor Brian Kemp's signature that could have long-lasting political effects on the election interference case against then-President Donald Trump that was filed in 2021 by Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis. Some of the other stories we're following on Political Update here on Atlanta News First. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has hinted that she will perhaps be entering the 2026 wide-open Georgia gubernatorial race. We all know Governor Brian Kemp is term limited at 2 terms, meaning that the 2026 Georgia governor's race will be wide open. Keisha Lance Bottoms is a former Atlanta mayor. She only served 1 term, choosing not to run for re-election, and that led to the election of current Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens. Keisha Lance Bottoms, after deciding not to run for re-election after her 1 term, was a member of President Joe Biden's White House staff and was an advisor to the then former President Joe Biden's re-election campaign that he abandoned shortly after just a truly disastrous debate here in Atlanta against his Republican challenger, Donald Trump. The Georgia governor's race, as I said, is wide open. We only have currently 1 announced candidate, that being Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr. He is the only formally announced candidate who is considering or who will be running for governor next year. A lot of rumors and speculation surround Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, obviously former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, possibly Georgia Congresswoman Lucy McBath, who has suspended her gubernatorial exploratory committee in the wake of her husband's unfortunate cancer diagnosis, possibly State Senator Jason Estevez, and possibly former state lawmaker, former labor commissioner, and former DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurmond on the Democratic side. So those are some of the candidates that we will continue to watch and listen for as the wide-open 2026 Georgia gubernatorial race truly gets underway now that the 2025 Georgia General Assembly has concluded. Those are some of the stories we're continuing to follow on Political Update here on Atlanta News First. We invite you to always listen and watch all of the Atlanta News First podcast on YouTube. You can also listen and download all of the Atlanta News First podcasts, such as Political Update, Decatur Dish, ATL Vault, and Behind the Investigation, featuring the Southeast's largest team of investigative reporters. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com. I'm Tim Darnell.